Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stacy Huff, and I serve as president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Our topic today is review of the 2019 legislative session. With the recent close of the 2019 legislative session, we are very grateful to have our two panelists here today to recap and provide their perspective and answer our questions surrounding the activities, debates, votes, and bills that occurred during the session. Tobacco-free school bills, fixes to the state tax code, conceal and carry, just to name a few. There were also several pension-related bills that were very much brought to our attention by the JCPS teachers' sick-outs. While many of us can't be there to witness the legislative session activity for ourselves, we have to rely on all forms of media. That is why, again, we are excited to hear from our two panelists today who are very much involved. So participating on our panel today is Senate Majority Caucus Chair Julie Raque Adams and Senate Minority Floor Leader Morgan McGarvey. It is an understatement to say that they are both active members of our Louisville community, which is one reason why we are very excited they are here with us today. So first we're going to start with Ms. Adams speaking, but I'd like to give a quick introduction of Julie. Julie is a Republican member of the Kentucky Senate. She serves on numerous committees, both within our government and within our community. Health and Welfare and Family Services Committee, Banking and Insurance, Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Board Committee. She's also on the board for Family Scholar House, Salvation Army, and University of Louisville McConnell Center, to name a few. Julie received her undergraduate degrees from St. Mary's College and Notre Dame, and her master's from the George Washington University. She is a mother of two and also the owner of Adams & Call, Inc. Julie?
All right, thanks. I promise I won't mess up your papers.
I'm just going to take these and put them in.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. It's really great to be here today. I have a few remarks. Some of the things I'll talk about didn't make headlines, and some of the things I talked about did make headlines. And so here we go. The Kentucky General Assembly passed about 200 bills during this latest session, and it was one of our busiest sessions ever. Education, safety, business, and good government were among the high-profile issues addressed. Most of the laws that came from the legislation that do not contain emergency clauses or different specified effective dates will go into effect on Thursday, June 27th, 2019. This is the full 90 days that will have passed after our final adjournment, which was on May 28th. So some of the highlighted topics I'll start with is, first of all, we passed some education-related measures which are of great interest to many in this community. Senate Bill 1, also known as our School Safety and Resilience Act, it was a pivotal measure that really pinpointed the safety of our schools. It was developed in remembrance of the Marshall County High School shooting, and this was a bipartisan effort. It was widely considered as the highest legislative priority of the 2019 session, as both Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1 was the School Safety and Resilience Act. So after months of immense discussion and research, this collaborative bill was the product of a specially formed committee called the School Safety Working Group. And the goal of SB 1 was to improve student safety by boosting safety and prevention training, promoting the assignment of a school resource officer to every school, increasing awareness of suicide prevention efforts, encouraging collaboration with law enforcement personnel, and hiring more counselors in school districts. So while no legislation is perfect, when it concerns the well-being of our students, inaction is not really an option. And Senate Bill 1 was a step in the right direction. And I look forward to addressing the school safety issues provisions further in the 2020 regular session, which is when we will discuss the budget issues that surround this authorizing language. One of the other education-related bills was House Bill 11, which bans the use of tobacco and vaping products by students, school personnel, and visitors on public school campuses during all school-related activities. We passed several, what I call good government bills that were particularly long overdue in our state. First one was Senate Bill 6, which was a priority, and it relates to the executive branch ethics and requires the disclosure of compensation of executive agency lobbyists. Right now, there's full disclosure when it comes to legislative lobbying. There is nothing that has to do with the contractual point of lobbying or the executive branch lobbying. So now we're going to go ahead and take care of that, and again, it's long overdue. Senate Bill 57, which expands the number of Kentuckians eligible to have low-level felonies expunged from their criminal records. This measure offers discretionary expungement to all Class D felonies, with some exceptions for crimes such as stealing in the workplace, abusing children, and sex abuse. Senate Bill 57 includes an approximate 5-year waiting period to apply. We also did Senate Bill 60, which is concerns elections. What we did is we changed the date of filing for a candidate for office in local, regional, and state elections. As of right now, it was the last Tuesday in January, and now we've changed it to the first Friday after the first Monday in January. So we moved it up a couple of weeks. Let's see, we did some women and family issues. One of the first ones, which is, again, long overdue, was the Pregnant Workers' Rights Act. And everyone's like, what is the Pregnant Workers' Rights Act? Well, what it is, it makes it unlawful for an employer to fail to accommodate an employee affected by pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical condition. This was huge. This was, I think, 3 years in the making, Morgan, and it's long overdue. House Bill 158, which is cited as the Kentucky Foster Child Bill of Rights Act, it grants 16 rights for children who are in and out of home placement. It requires them to have adequate food, clothing, and shelter, a safe, secure, and stable family, and freedom from physical, sexual, or emotional injury or exploitation. And then the bill that I passed, which I'm particularly proud of, was Senate Bill 77, which expands Kentucky's current organ donor registration in the state. Right now, we're moving to a real ID system, and so your registration for your license is now, instead of every 4 years, it's every 8 years. And so we were going to lose 50% of those people that we traditionally captured to put on the organ donor registry. And so what we're doing now through the state is, through the state portal, we're able to, if you go in to renew your professional license or you sign up to get a hunting license, there's actually a picture or a page that shows up, and it says, would you like to be an organ donor? And so we're going to capture hundreds of thousands of people each year just through that state portal to become an organ donor. And that's really, I think, exciting. And it's actually the most progressive organ donor bill in the entire country, so we're hoping that many other states will follow our lead. We also passed Senate Bill 100, which is legislation to reform Kentucky's current private solar net metering policy. This was not an uncontroversial measure. It included changes to how much credit owners of solar power systems are reimbursed for electricity that they add to the power grid by allowing the Public Service Commission to have jurisdiction over how they set compensation rates. And then House Bill 354 provides tax relief to banks and to nonprofits, in addition to strengthening Kentucky's ability to collect sales tax on online purchases. And I know you're kind of getting bored at this point, so I'm going to wrap it up. And so that was kind of it. That's just a tiny little sliver of what we took care of during this session. And like I said, any session, some people think it was fantastic, some people think it was awful. I think that we always can kind of come down somewhere in the middle. And so thank you for listening to me today, and I'm very proud to represent the city of Louisville.
All right. So Morgan McGarvey, the Senate Minority Floor Leader. Morgan is a Democratic member of the Kentucky Senate. As Senate Minority Floor Leader, Morgan became one of the youngest members of a General Assembly in the nation to serve in that leadership role. Morgan earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Missouri and his JD from the University of Kentucky College of Law. Like Julie, Morgan also serves on various government committees, State and Local Government Committee, Appropriations and Revenue, Medicaid Oversight and Advisory Committee, just to name a few. Morgan has 2 small children and is an attorney with Morgan & Pottinger. Morgan?
Thank you very much for having me. I will update one part of my biography. I have 3 small children now. The third one is very small, and she's getting teeth. So bear with me. No, thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to the high school students who are here today. So much of what we do every session, particularly this session, impacts you directly now and will impact you more than anyone else in this room in the future. So thank you for being involved. Let's talk about the 2019 General Assembly session. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. I don't know if anybody else here is, but as you watch Game of Thrones, you see this real-world political drama play out in epic fantasy fashion as they are warring each other to see who sits on the Iron Throne. I think they probably looked at Frankfurt this year and said, wow, those people are messed up. We have these 30-day sessions that we just went through as what are supposed to be cleanup sessions to get rid of the special sessions that used to plague the General Assembly and have cleanup bills. So that's what this 30-day session was. And I think when we came into this 30-day session, we should have had 2 goals. First goal, to work on pensions. The second goal, to clean up the tax bill that we passed last year. How was our success on those 2 goals? Not good, to put it mildly. The first, let's talk about pensions, because that seems to have everybody's attention right now with the governor's recent veto and the announcement of a special session. So we came in, and with the pensions, we have this sort of unique problem. Talk about pensions globally first. There's the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, and then there's everybody else who gets a pension. We're talking about everybody else right now. Within that, there's this little sphere called the quasi-governmental agencies. Now, most of the time when you talk about pensions for quasi-governmental agencies, people's eyes completely glaze over. So what does that even mean? We're talking about your regional universities, your rape crisis centers, your mental health centers, literally agencies that receive some governmental funds and perform some governmental purpose are quasi-governmental agencies. Well, as everyone knows, we have a big pension unfunded liability. But what most people don't realize is that in these quasis, everyone else other than teachers, no one gets a pension since January 1 of 2014. Everyone is in this 401k style plan. So using the Republicans' own numbers, the normal operating cost for a business or one of these agencies is 9% of payroll. For every dollar you give in payroll, you have 9 cents in benefits on that dollar. Well, what do we do when we have an unfunded liability in Frankfurt? Well, since we don't have enough money in Frankfurt right now, we shift those costs. And what we have done is we have shifted the costs onto these groups. We are making them pay 43 cents for benefits on every dollar of payroll. Well, that amount was set to go up to 83 cents on July 1st of this year. So we had to act. Right? We froze it, but we had to act. Otherwise, these places would shut down. They couldn't afford to do that. What we should have done is freeze it and look for revenue. What we did is pass House Bill 38, or 358. House Bill 358 came in and it said, okay, guess what? You have to either get out completely of the pension system And then we'll freeze your rate for your legacy employees at 43 cents. Or if you opt to stay in, you have to go up to 83 cents. But if you opt out, you can be put on a payment plan to pay off your actuarial cost. Now, the reality is that payment plan would leave the state billions of dollars short at the end of the 30-year period. The other real kicker is that if you miss one of those payments by 30 days, on the 31st day, the benefits for every single employee and retiree that ever worked for you are suspended. So you put in 30 years working for the state at a university, and you're living paycheck to paycheck on your pension, even though you never missed a payment, and you're sitting at home, you find out your pension stopped because of nothing you did. I voted against this bill. We thought, though, when it passed the last night of the session, the governor had signaled that he would support this bill. Now, unbelievably, the governor vetoed it a couple of weeks ago. I can only imagine what Senate President Robert Stivers felt like when the governor said without any warning to the legislature at all that he was vetoing it. It reminds me of the story that the Southern columnist for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, Louis Cruzard, used to tell. It was a joke about college football. He says, imagine it, Auburn and Alabama are playing in the Iron Bowl, a trip to the SEC championship on the line. Auburn's down 5 with 4 seconds to go, 4th and goal from the 1. The Auburn coach calls a timeout. He doesn't know what to do, and so he looks up to the heavens in prayer, and he says, God, what do I do? God says, fake the handoff and run right. Auburn coach dials in the play, and sure enough, he calls it. His offense runs it. The defense reads it perfectly, drops him 3 yards for a loss. Alabama wins. Auburn coach is devastated. He looks up afterwards, and he says, God, I don't mean to be ungrateful, but why'd we call that play? And God says, I don't know, Bear. Why did we call that play? I think when Stivers said, Governor, why'd you veto that bill? The governor might have said something along the lines of Kentucky Democratic Chairman Ben Self. Hey, Ben, why'd we write that veto release the way we did? But now we have to do something about it, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to come back in a special session, and the first thing we have to do is we have to freeze the rate for these businesses so they don't go out of business. The second thing we need to do, and this is where we failed, is we need to find revenue. Yes, we passed a tax cleanup bill. We passed a revenue bill this year. What was missing from the revenue bill? Revenue, right? We don't have enough money to fund the basic needs and obligations of state government as it currently exists. And what did we do? We gave out more tax breaks in a non-budget year. This is not how we should govern. So if we didn't fix pensions and we didn't find revenue, what did we do this session? I take you back to Game of Thrones. The whole purpose in Game of Thrones right now is to see, who can get to be king of Westeros. The 2019 session is all about who gets to be governor of Kentucky. It is a low turnout year, but the governor's race looms large over everything we do. In November of 2019, when not many people vote, you've got to get your base out. We have an unpopular governor in a low turnout election. So we focused on bills that deal with God, guns, and gynecology, red meat base issues. We passed 4 abortion bills. We passed a law that mandates In God We Trust goes in every public school, and we passed a law that says you should have no education or no training whatsoever to carry a concealed deadly weapon. These are not the types of bills that move our state forward in any economic or real way. I don't want to leave on a bad note. So George Costanza from Seinfeld always says, leave on a good note. The first thing I'll say is it was wonderful to have Senator Julie Raque Adams in Senate leadership this year. She is, even when we didn't agree, she was always very agreeable about it. Her door is always open. And in an unreasonable session, she was often a voice of reason. We did do good things this session. And Julie pointed out a lot of those. We finally passed a Pregnant Workers Protection Act. We finally banned smoking and vaping, importantly, on school campuses. We passed a bill that updates our laws. You can now electronically record documents in courthouses in Kentucky. We did some of the basic cleanup things that this session was meant to do. But I'm reminded of a line from one of my favorite poets, T.S. Eliot. And what he said in his poem, The Four Quartets, is, the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we began and to know it again for the first time. When we come back in the 2020 session, we will have to deal with these problems that, quite frankly, have plagued Kentucky for more than a decade. And it's that sense of agreeableness that I hope we can renew and look for the budgetary answers so that we do put education, healthcare, job training, and hope back into the hearts and minds of Kentuckians. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, now we're going to open it up. We have some board members that are going to ask questions of our panelists from our members. So, Joe?
And for those of you who have to hand them over, let me know, and I'll be happy to take those from you here right now. Thank you, Emily. Very good. First two are companion questions, so we'll ask of both of you, given the budget challenges faced by Louisville and many other communities, what revenue options do you have in mind for Louisville? The second question is specifically for Senator Adams. What do you as a Republican from Louisville intend to do to help the city of Louisville and other cities raise revenue by passing bills to allow this? So perhaps we'll start with you and then Senator McGarvey. Thank you.
Sure. And, first of all, we talk about revenue, and why didn't we do any revenue issues this year? Well, the reason we didn't do any revenue issues this year is because it's not a budget year. And so to Morgan's point, I think it's really important that we discuss revenue issues because they're going to be vital going into next year's budget session. We have to talk about things that are bigger than expanded gaming or, some of the ones that we traditionally hear about. I'll take expanded gaming, for instance. We've been talking about that for 12 years. We file bills all the time, and they just never get passed. So it's not the panacea. It's not the silver bullet. So we have to look beyond expanded gaming. But I think in that vein, it's important to look at expanding revenue when it comes to discretionary dollars. I think that it's a less of a hard pill to swallow when you look at discretionary dollars. For instance, maybe we look at how we, right now, we tax historical racing at pari-mutuel levels. Why don't we look at taxing historical racing at actual gaming levels? Even if we raised it up to 10% or 12% from 3.5%. I think that's, in my opinion, that's where we start the conversation. I think in the second question that Joe asked was, how do we give Louisville some relief so that they can kind of be master of their own domain? I think that's a legitimate conversation to have during this session too, this upcoming session, because we have to allow the flexibility. Right now, the city of Bowling Green is able to tax their restaurants and the city of Louisville is not. So why do we have that disparity right now in our tax code? These are very simple items that I think that we could tweak and really allow Louisville to have more flexibility in how it starts to pay its own obligations.
Yeah, and I agree with Julie, and we talk about gaming, we should do it. Just so you all know, Julie and I have together introduced a gaming bill in the Senate. It's a constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendments can't go on the ballot in odd-numbered years. Earliest it can go on the ballot is 2020, so we couldn't do it this session. I hope it happens next session, but we need to think bigger than that, and that's the reality. Any of these revenue solutions like gaming are Band-Aids, and the ultimate solution lies in some type of meaningful tax reform. Julie is correct. We need to look at the restaurant tax here in Louisville. We need to pass the Local Investments for Transformation Act, which just gives Louisville the ability to allow its voters to vote on whether they want to fund certain projects with revenue. It's not even a tax increase. That's something we should absolutely do. Again, constitutional amendment, we couldn't have done that this year. We need to do it again. I think also, we've got to look at our tax code in a real and fair way. We made big changes to the tax code last year. We had to fix some of them this year. So we're operating in the negative. We passed a tax cut which really benefits the wealthiest Kentuckians. If we revert back just to where we were at 6% on people making an adjusted gross income of over $1 million a year, we generate $25 to $30 million annually for the state of Kentucky. These are the types of conversations we need to be having. And so We need more revenue options in the state. We know that, especially going into 2020, and I hope that that's something certainly we take up with all voices considered.
Thank you. Jim?
This is for both of you. What is the future of allowing wine shipments to Kentucky, and does it ever have a chance of passing?
Yeah, I hope it's bright. We should allow wine shipments into Kentucky and join all the other states that do it. I think there's a good chance that happens. The bill passed the Senate this year. It got stuck in the House. As I understand it, some people were mad that you could allow the direct shipment of wine and not the direct shipment of bourbon, and that caused a big conflict. So let's go ahead and get that done.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think we were both co-sponsors, weren't we? Both co-sponsors of that. And the truth is, as Morgan said, it passed out of the Senate, but the Kentucky Distillers Association was opposed to it. So, that's what happens when there is a political force that kind of rains down. And so it failed. And it's too bad because we need to do it. They talked about the issue of parity as the reason why they were opposed. There's only 5 states that allow the direct shipment of bourbon into their states. I mean, we would have to go into all the other states and have them change their state laws to allow them to ship bourbon directly into their states. That's not our job. So the parity issue was not our responsibility, but it is a huge, huge outcry from a lot of the folks I represent. They are dying to have direct wine shipments into their homes. So I think we'll see it next year.
Okay. The questioner writes, we are a very poor state economically. In order to help our kids and grandkids financially, when will we go to a complete 401k retirement plan so our descendants won't be burdened?
I don't know if I can answer that because I don't see the the only reason that a defined benefit plan is viable is because that you have new workers that come in and that are paying for the workers that are close to retired. So I don't know what the actuarial studies would be on something like that, but all I know is that I think that we've, as far as the current status of where we are, we have made a promise. We need to figure out how to keep it. We need to make sure that we fund it. And I was proud actually last year during the last session that we funded the pension system, I think, whole for the first time in many years. We all voted for that. And we also put in an additional $1 billion for the teachers. So, I think we're just trying to do the best we can, but I don't know if I can give a real solid answer for that question.
I'll try. I think the question itself is fundamentally flawed and doesn't show an understanding of the pension system in Kentucky. First of all, we have an unfunded liability. That unfunded liability does not go away by switching to a 401k system. Let's go over this again globally. There are 2 pension systems we have. The Kentucky Retirement System, which is everybody other than teachers. And the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, which you guessed it, is teachers. Okay? The Kentucky Retirement System is the least funded at 12% funded. But 70% of the unfunded liability rests with people who are already retired. We have laws in Kentucky that protect retirees, which is, I agree with the governor on this actually. It's our legal and moral obligation to do that. So going to a 401k system does nothing to the unfunded liability that exists. And if we pay off that unfunded liability, guess what? The system is 100% funded. The question ignores the pension reforms that have already taken place. In 2003, we had the first set of pension reforms. In 2008, we got rid of a lot of the pension that exists today with the Rule of 87, with the health benefits, and starting January 1 of 2014, no one other than teachers in Kentucky gets a defined benefit pension. You take people out of that system, and as Julie said, you have nobody paying that unfunded cost. The state is still going to pay it. So what you've done is you've actually made it more expensive by switching. Now, with Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, let's talk about 401ks. Okay, teachers don't get Social Security, period. They don't even get survivor's benefits from Social Security. So if you want to go to a 401k system, the first thing you have to do is put teachers back on Social Security. Well, that's 6.5% of payroll. Then you have to give them a 401k match. Let's say it's 5%, which is not atypical for people with 2 college degrees. Now you're at 11.5% cost of payroll to have teachers in a 401k. The normal operating cost of the teacher's defined benefit system is 6% of payroll. So if you want us to pay 5.5% more so you can have the privilege of saying there's a 401k, that's fine. I just think it's a fundamentally flawed assertion.
Jim?
All right, this question's for both of you. How much did the for-profit utilities' $327,050 in political contributions last year influence the anti-solar power bill's passage this year?
You know, do you want me to go first?
Whichever.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I always think that it's funny because people think that, oh, you know, people are writing checks, and so therefore you must be influenced by that. I think that, I mean, to take a line from Morgan's last answer, I think that's a fundamentally flawed way to view the system. If you look at political contributions, I received contributions from both the solar industry and the utility industry. You know, we have to look at each piece of legislation and we have to read it and we have to determine if we think that it's the right course of action relative to that particular issue. And if we are going to have solar as a defined energy source in the state of Kentucky, it should probably be regulated by the entity that regulates every other energy source in the state of Kentucky, and that's the Public Service Commission. And so I don't think that, at least my objective when I look at legislative issues, I try not to look at them in terms of who's going to win and who's going to lose, who's you know, how can I put my thumb over someone so that there's a winner and a loser. I think that this was a bill that had, over the course of several years and several iterations, came down to a point where both sides gave a little. Some won on some issues, some lost on other issues, but I think it was a good compromise, and I think it was probably the best piece of legislation we could have had.
You know, look, I think there is an influence of money in politics. I think there's too much of an influence of money in today's politics. When you talk about this bill in particular, there is quite a history to this bill that I think is important to know too. This bill was defeated several years in a row, 2 years in a row. And it was defeated on a grassroots effort, largely. What I will say is one of the things that doesn't get talked about from this General Assembly that much, and probably should, one of the big influencers this session is the fact that 51 out of 100 members of the House were in their either first or second term in office. There's been a huge turnover, and I think it was probably easier with an organized lobbying effort from the utilities to sway some of the newer members than it was to replicate the year's worth of work by the grassroots side. I personally don't like the final version of the bill that was passed. I think we should be doing creative things to encourage more renewable energy in the state. I think this forecloses a lot of that. But it does represent some compromise over years, and just the utilities' efforts alone, I think negates a lot of the success that the grassroots have had in this area.
Yeah, and to Morgan's point, talking about the grassroots, last year when we discussed the bill, it was a huge grassroots effort by the solar industry. This year was a huge grassroots effort by the utility industry. And so it was remarkable how many more I got last year from solar, and it was remarkable how many postcards I got this year from utilities. So it all just kind of depends on who's most active.
I'm going to combine two questions here. Both have different ideas about revenue streams. One question is, how much revenue is lost by the repeal of the bank franchise tax? In light of the pension shortfall, how can that money be replaced, and how can the cut be justified without the replacement of revenue? And I'll follow that up with, what are the chances of raising the gas tax in the future, and by how much? So bank franchise tax and gas tax. Senator McGarvey, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Let's talk about the bank franchise tax quickly. One thing about the bank franchise tax is we should never call it that. It really should almost be more of a Kentucky Community Bank Act, because a lot of the Kentucky community banks, what we're seeing is they're getting bought by out-of-state banks who are booking their capital elsewhere and are not getting taxed at the same rate that Kentucky banks were getting taxed, in part because the Kentucky bank tax was so high. The Kentucky banks got put on par with the corporate tax in Kentucky, which I don't think is fundamentally an unfair notion. I think the corporate tax is too low, is the problem there. So the total amount lost in the bank franchise tax is actually not as much as has been reported, because there's going to be more banks that likely stay in Kentucky. I think that's something that we have to watch, and we have to be careful, because again, my biggest problem with this revenue bill and why it ultimately does not have my support is that we gave away too much without getting anything else in return. And that's why we have to start talking about new revenue streams. We do have to look at things like the gas tax. We do have to take right now we give away more in tax giveaways than we spend in the Kentucky budget. So we have more giveaways than we have expenditures. There has not been a thorough overhaul of those expenditures. Which ones are actually working? And I'm not saying get rid of all of them, but let's take a look and see which ones are working. And if they're not working for Kentucky right now, then let's get rid of them. And I know it's hard to tell people they're not getting their tax break, but you know what? I mean, our roads are crumbling. Our education has been underfunded for the last decade. Our higher ed costs are funded at the rates they were in 1994 in nominal dollars, not adjusted for inflation. You know, when you look at the states that surround us that we often want to compare ourselves to, they're killing us in all these regards. So, you know, yes, we need to take the 2020 budget very seriously, because I think it sets the tone for where we're going in the next decade.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I liked a lot of what Morgan said. You know, it's so long overdue for us to look at Kentucky's tax code. And part of the reason it's so long overdue is because the second that you do it, you get rocks hurled at you. I mean, you know, and politicians aren't necessarily considered to be the most courageous of creatures. And so why do we want to have rocks thrown at us? But it's necessary, it's important, and it's vital that that Kentucky transition its economy and its tax code to be more competitive, not only with our surrounding states, but, you know, we start to have some influence globally, because we do export and import products that are Kentucky specific. So long story short, we need to do that. The other thing that I will add relative to the gas tax is a couple of years ago, we had an opportunity to raise the gas tax, and I voted no on that. And the reason was because it was just kind of a blanket, let's raise the gas tax, and it didn't touch the formula that adhered to how those tax dollars were distributed. And quite honestly, Louisville was really left behind in that formula. And so I said to the people who were really promoting it, they're like, our roads are terrible, our bridges are crumbling. And I said, change the formula about how Louisville gets its fair share. And so I think next year what we're going to see is that people were finally listening. And so rather than these small counties that have no population growth at all, you know, Louisville we're going to have a recalculation so that Louisville starts to get those dollars back here, because here's where the population is, here's where the economic development is, and we should have those dollars back right here.
This question is for both of you and deals with procedure. It says, for the first time ever, the General Assembly waived readings on bills, which can allow a bill to be passed in only one day, rather than the minimum 5 days, which has always been required. This may further undermine trust in the process. How can we ensure that this process, waiving of readings, will not be abused in the future?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll take it.
We actually really get along. It's like, I know it's weird it feels like separated. So
It's my best friend in the General Assembly.
you have the other half of the necklace. Here's the reality on the waiving of readings. This is a direct result of dicta from a Supreme Court opinion of last year that seemed to indicate that this could happen in some type of emergency circumstance. Both times we did it this year, I think both times we did it, I voted against waiving the readings and then voted for the bill, I think is what happened, because the bills probably were okay. But I do not think in any way, shape, or form we should ever begin to adopt this as standard operating procedure in the General Assembly, period. And this is not a Democrat or a Republican type thing, because here's the one thing I know. I know that the Republicans will not always be in charge, and I know that the Democrats will not always be in charge. And we need to set the government up for a way that benefits the people, and that's through transparency, and being able to waive readings and cram bills through at the last minute doesn't benefit anybody.
I couldn't have said it better myself,
The underlying word in that last question was trust. This next question also deals with trust. How can or do you restore teacher trust after these past two sessions, i.e. sick-outs? Senator Raque Adams.
Sure, I'll start. And, I've always said that I think that the disconnect between government and teachers is because of the way that certain people in our government have spoken to them and characterized them. And that's a shame. I think that we need to do a much better job in how we communicate with each other. I think we need to do a much better job in respecting where everyone comes from. And I like to say that personally, I try to be very careful with my words and my actions. I like to think that I collaborate, and I much more prefer to bring people together. I can only control myself. I can only, I think, set an example through the way that I conduct myself. And it's my hope that other people will follow that lead. I think a lot of people don't like government because they don't like the way that people are talking nowadays. And so it's important that we, as leaders, set the example of how we talk to each other. I think it's the human and it's the kind thing to do.
I agree with Julie, and the answer is I'm not really sure how to restore that trust. Because look at the 2018 session. The teachers were sincerely led to believe that the pension bill was dead. And it was brought up in a surprise to them, and honestly in a surprise to most of us as well, and put on a sewer bill at the last minute and passed in the dead of night. How do you come back from that, right? It's hard because what is the old saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So when you look at that, what happened last year, when you look at our national politics right now, when you look at our politics coming out of the first floor of the Capitol, it's easy to see why people don't trust. And so who do they also not trust? The person that stands up and says, trust me. Right? So to earn that trust back, I think it is going to take time. I think it's going to take, like Julie said, that openness of communication. And it's going to take some acceptance on both sides too. The acceptance that we can openly and honestly communicate on things and then occasionally even be wrong. Yeah. But if we're willing to admit when that happens, it's developing that trust. It's going to take time, but it's something that certainly I've worked for this session. I know Julie has worked toward it. And it's even something that on at least one issue this year we worked together on to try and help people see what was going on in a transparent way. We'll continue to do that, and my hope is that over time we restore a lot of that trust.
This next questioner has, has two questions, maybe not related, but I'm going to throw them both out there. First of all, the bill to raise the minimum age for tobacco use did not pass. Why? And secondly, can you discuss the huge gap between Louisville and urban legislative priorities?
You want me to go first? Sure. Okay. The Tobacco 21 bill did not pass, which I was hoping that it would. I was fully supportive of raising the age to 21. But here's it wasn't for policy reasons that Tobacco 21 failed, I think it was for political reasons. And it's not the normal political reasons. From what I understand, that the bill had the votes, the sponsor presented it to the committee, and the committee was in the process of doing their roll call vote, and one member voted for raising it to 21, but then proceeded to have a long dissertation about why the bill was so bad. And the people who voted after him, I think, got a little squirrely, and they all voted no. And so what we went into having the votes in committee, then it actually failed in committee. And so people were really upset that people didn't hold to their votes, and it was not a good, there wasn't a lot of communication, and it was, so I think it just got messed up. At that point, people said, all right, it's dead. And so it never moved on. There were several attempts during the session to attach it on to another bill because people were very passionate about it, but that didn't, but those efforts failed too. So it was really, I think it's unfortunate because it's something that we need to revisit in the next session.
Yeah, and let me add to everything Julie said that I agree with. You know, we just talked about the trust and occasionally allowing us to not know something or not be correct about something. So there's a huge difference between the Senate and the House, and you're getting the Senate perspective right now. The House is still sort of the Wild West of Frankfurt, and the Senate is a lot more buttoned up, just in the way it runs. For those of you that have watched Frankfurt, you know that's true. Since I'm in the Senate, it is very rare. No bill has ever failed on the floor since I've been in the Senate, and very, very, very rarely do bills fail in committee. Bills that get voted on in the Senate are bills that are moving. So most of us that were watching that process were completely surprised. The fact it got a committee vote signaled to all of us who watched the Senate closely that bill was going to pass. So when Julie says that something got screwed up in the committee, I do think that happened in real time. It wasn't a plot that was laid beforehand for some kind of show. So I think it was a surprise. I think it will be back, and it's probably something that will pass. When we talk about the urban-rural divide, I think that's real too. I think we have to acknowledge that's real. It's something we need to address. I think as Louisville legislators in particular, and for Julie and for me in leadership, one of the things we have to do is talk about it, but I think the way we talk about it is important. I think we need to start talking about the rural-urban bond, because the reality is we are so interconnected that we shouldn't be having these squabbles. What do most people in my age call someone from outside of Jefferson County? Mom and dad, right? We all have family from outside of Louisville. We are connected to the state. We are where people are moving so they can be in Kentucky near their families, but get good paying jobs. We honor our traditions. Look, it's Derby week. It's almost Derby time, right? I mean, this is when Louisville, we honor our traditions. We love our past, but we also have shared values of compassion and kindness that we can get around the state. And the more that we can see that bond, that Louisville's future is Kentucky's future, that we can relay that to people, bring legislators in here and see them, then I think we can do a better job of seeing this as one Kentucky, where hopefully we'll get a little bit more progress legislatively.
Time for that one. Is there any relief for small businesses such as house cleaners, lawn services, or handymen from having to charge sales tax?
That was one of the items that we cleaned up. It was an unintended consequence from last year's budget bill. We tried to clean it up this year. Not that there was relief from having the tax obligation, sales tax obligation, but some of these contractors and subcontractors were having to pay double sales tax. And so we clarified that language. So that that did not occur anymore.
No, that's all right. I mean, and Julie, to give her credit, Julie led the effort on a lot of that.
Jim, I think we have time for one more question if you guys want. Or Joe.
Our final one will end on a visionary note. Kentucky, well, first, kind of just a discouraging note, then with visionary. Kentucky resides at the bottom of all states in every category except fine people. Do you have a vision of rising up to our neighboring states, and if so, what is it?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of
Kentucky resides at the bottom of all states, thanks for making me repeat this, in every category except fine people. Do you have a vision of rising up to our neighbor states, our neighboring states?
Fine as in F-I-N-E?
Fine people. We have good people in Kentucky, but we lag everywhere else. What's your vision to rise up for our neighboring states that seem to be doing better?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, there's all different kinds of reasons why you run for public office. And people I know ask Morgan and I all the time, gosh, why do you do what you do? And why do you put up with, you know, some of the nonsense that you put up with? And I don't want to speak for Morgan, but he has a true servant's heart. And part of the reason I ran for office is because I have a servant's heart and I want to help people. I want to serve people. I want to do better by people. I want to have policies that I can get behind that help families, that help children, that help women, that are issues that we've never talked about because sometimes they're uncomfortable. And I think that, you know, you squander your ability as a leader if you don't talk nicely or you use your position to empower yourself. And I think that both Morgan and I try to use our positions to empower others. And I think that hopefully we can set an example so that other people want to involve themselves in public service because it truly is an honorable way to spend your day.
Thank you, Julie. And it is a pleasure serving with you, and it's great to have you in leadership. And I mean that very sincerely. We talk about the future of Kentucky. You know, people say, what keeps you up at night? This is what keeps me up at night. And we talk about the political bills and the abortion bills or whatever that dominated this session. You know, I told you I have an 8-month-old daughter, so this is very real to me right now. I love this place. I chose to come back here. I was at a Leadership Kentucky class, and I asked them in 22 years, if everything goes perfectly for the daughter I have at home right now, how many of you think that her best economic opportunity is here? And nobody raised their hand. That's discouraging. But you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. One of the things we can do is just look back to the recent successes. 20 years ago, you talk about our surrounding states, they were looking at us. We don't accept our own greatness sometimes. We're afraid of change and we get afraid to excel. We had a Bucks for Brains program in higher education that was the envy of the country. We passed education reforms in the 90s that states like Missouri and Tennessee and North Carolina were going, how do we be more like Kentucky? Well, we need to lead again. And we need to do it by acknowledging who we are and who we want to be. We're going to have disagreements between Democrats and Republicans, but I honestly believe that we want the same thing. We want for Kentucky to be the great place we grew up in and a place where our children and grandchildren can come back to. And if we can use that as our North Star, if we can look at our successes and take the best practices from other states, we can do it.
All right, thank you both. On behalf of the entire Louisville Forum, we do thank you for being with us today. And as an expression of our appreciation, we will make a donation on your behalf to a charitable organization you choose from a list that the board pre-selected, which is right here if anyone is ever interested. Our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, May 8th. We are still working out the details of the program, but we will send out emailed invitations and we'll update our website as soon as possible. Reservations may be made online at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail at 329-0111. Have a great day.